5:30 in the Iranian capital, Tehran. You're watching Press TV's World News. Thank you very much for joining us. Our top story, the Israeli military says a Syrian anti-aircraft missile has landed near a nuclear plant. The military said the missile had overflown its target, adding that the Dimona reactor was not hit. No casualties or damage were reported. The regime says it has carried out strikes against the Syrian missile batteries in retaliation for the alleged missile launch. The incident comes less than a day after a powerful explosion hit a sensitive missile factory that develops rocket engines and houses several types of missiles in the Ramal city. We were earlier joined by our Damascus correspondent Mohammed Ali to get more on the latest Israeli strike on the Syrian capital.
An official Syrian issued a statement confirming that yes, there was an Israeli attack on Damascus countryside. The statement said that at 1:38 a.m. local time in Damascus, Israel launched several missiles from the direction of the occupied Syrian Golan, targeting some positions around the capital Damascus, meaning in Damascus countryside. And directly, Syrian air defenses responded, shooting down, intercepting most of the enemy missiles, and the Israeli attack eventually led to the injury of 4 Syrian soldiers and also caused some material damage. Now, this is definitely not the first time Israel attacks Syria, almost targeting Syrian army positions, sometimes in Damascus or its countryside, and other times in other parts of the country. Sometimes it uses surface missiles. Sometimes it uses its fighter jets, violating Lebanese airspace, for example. And in the end, this is definitely an attack against Syria's sovereignty, and it's against international law.
Michael Springman is an author and former U.S. diplomat and joins us now out of Washington, D.C. for more on this developing and breaking story. Michael, it's good to see you. This is, we can say, a game changer. I mean, no matter how Tel Aviv will try to twist the events or the incident itself, at the end of the day, a Syrian missile has hit in the proximity of the Dimona, Israel's Dimona nuclear site where nuclear weapons are stored.
A taste of their own medicine. They happily bomb Lebanon, they happily bomb Syria, they happily bomb Iraq, and now when somebody fires back, and I really wonder if that was an anti-aircraft missile that landed in near Dimona, or whether it was a real honest-to-God missile that the Syrians were tired of being bombed and figured they would strike back. The Israelis are very sensitive about Dimona. They shot down an Egyptian airliner in 1973 because it was flying near the reactor. They even shot down one of their own aircraft. And Dimona is the source of nearly 200 nuclear weapons that they hold, almost as much as Britain, and about 2/3 the amount that China has. So I think that this might get the Israelis' attention, although the Israelis, from what I've seen, have been strengthening air defenses around Dimona for a number of years now. I think they fear that sooner or later somebody's going to strike back at them, and they know full well that Dimona is the source of their power and their threats to lay waste to the entire region if they're attacked. So I think this is getting their attention, and I think that maybe they will reconsider their outrageous and aggressive actions in the area.
As you say, Michael, Israel has been striking Syria and again. Damascus has gone through diplomatic means to try and end the bombardments. That hasn't taken any effect, hasn't been effective, and we've seen that the Syrians are now striking back. How significant is this?
Well, I think it's very significant. I think they've done it when Joe Biden has just had his Secretary of Defense, former General Austin, meet with the Israelis and tell them how much the Americans supported Israel and how much the Americans loved Israel. And Biden himself claims to be a Zionist and loves Israel. He has Jews in his own family. So I think that and I would like to see more of the same. And and to demonstrate to the Israelis that they don't control the entire world.
We also had this. This comes a day after an incident where, in Israel itself, you had this really powerful explosion where missiles were advanced missiles at a manufacturing that the Israelis were manufacturing that just exploded suddenly. Today, you've got Dimona's being hit. Are we seeing a turn in events, in your opinion, a slight shift, a swing towards developments in the region following these incidents?
Yes, I think so. So, to quote Al Capone, the famous gangster in the 1930s in America, once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, the third time is enemy action. So maybe we'll have a third and a fourth and a fifth strike at Israel.
How much fear do you think there is at the moment within Israel itself? I remember last year the leader of the Lebanese Hezbollah resistance movement presented a map showing all the areas where the Lebanese resistance movement can strike all of occupied Palestine, and he said part of the reach of the Lebanese missiles is Dimona.
Well, I think the Israelis are scared. I know they're remarkably arrogant, but I don't think they're quite that stupid. They're able to assess how strong Hezbollah is. They're able to assess how strong the Syrian missile systems are, and they're able to realize that they have a lot of very unhappy Palestinians in what amounts to, or what they claim to be, their country, when in fact it's the Palestinians' country that they've taken over. I think that they're beginning maybe to see the handwriting on the wall that they can't go on forever without making some major changes and maybe trying to deal with reality rather than their own fantasies.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much indeed for that. Let me bring in from the Free Palestine movement, see if he's there. Paul, welcome. What's your reaction to this developing story? Paul's there. We're just having appears to be a sound glitch. Go ahead, Paul. Paul, start again if you can. Bring in Paul ASAP as soon as possible. Michael, Michael, you're still there. Good. Michael, just taking it on from that, as you say, you noted that it's a taste of their own medicine. The Israelis have committed atrocities all over the region. They've been hitting Lebanon, using Lebanese airspace to strike Syria, using the occupied Golan Heights to strike Syria, attacking Lebanon, destabilizing the region. And now we're seeing this explosion at a very, very sensitive nuclear site. You can say the most sensitive site in Israel, which is heavily protected.
Yeah, they've been strengthening their defenses for years, as I noted earlier, and they definitely don't want the Americans knowing anything about what's going on there. They shut out President John Kennedy's attempts to send inspectors there. I think what we need is a joint comprehensive plan of action for the Israelis and have international inspections of their nuclear facilities and what they're doing with them. I hardly think it's peaceful if they're using Dimona to build atomic bombs, at least 200 of them. So I think that the Israelis are very, very sensitive. They even shot down one of their own aircraft, I think, at one point for flying too near the site. And they've jailed people that have tried to tell all to British newspapers. And they brought the guy back to Israel and threw him in jail, where he's been held incommunicado for years ever since. So I think that the Israelis are very, very sensitive about that place, and definitely don't want to have anybody targeting it or even learning anything about it. In reality, what it's doing there, I hardly think it's a simple research facility as they claim.
But just the fact, Michael, that this has been not the facility itself, but in proximity, a site very close to the what is Israel's most sensitive site, that has been almost targeted. Look back decades ago where Israel had the upper hand, it could hit wherever it wants, and we're seeing over the years that you have one axis, essentially the Israelis and the Americans, and to a certain extent you can say now the Saudis and the Emiratis are joining in as well. And now you have on the other axis an axis of resistance against the tyrants and the dictatorships in this region. They're being strong. We're seeing a stronger reaction from them.
Yes, it's definitely good to see. It's been all Israel's way because Israel's had the backing of the United States and the Europeans, and now they realize that Hezbollah can hit anywhere it wants if it chooses. They've seen a strike from the Syrians. In the case of the Russians, I read articles that targets in Syria that are too close to Russian installations. And of course, the Russians were invited there. The United States was not, and is trying to occupy as much of Syria as possible. So I think that there may be some changes coming up in the region.
And also, of course, we can't, this incident comes amid rising tensions between Israel and Iran, which, peaked as well following that incident at the Natanz nuclear facility, which Iran accused Israel of perpetrating, alongside the United States, of course. What do you think that plays? Does that play a part in this?
In the strike from Syria into Israel, I don't know that it would. I think the Israeli attack on Natanz was done to try and derail the non-negotiations between the United States and Iran over America's return to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. I don't think this was an Iranian orchestrated response. I think it's more a happenstance, or in the case of the explosion in the Israeli rocket factory, it was basically a 1-2 punch of people who are fed up with being bombed. Certainly, this occupied Palestine, and of course, the Palestinians are very fed up with the out of control Israelis and how they're treated as third-class citizens and as subhumans. And of course, the Syrians are infuriated that the Israelis have free reign in destroying their country, and no one in the entire world does anything about it except wring their hands if ever. And they say, well, gee, ain't that awful? But then it's all the Syrians' fault because they won't let the Israelis control their government. So I think that I don't know that Iran is in this involved at all. I think it's coincidence in that case.
Michael, thank you very much indeed for your contribution and your time. Michael Springman there, author and former U.S. diplomat, joining us out of Washington. Let me bring in Paul Larudi from the Free Palestine Movement from Berkeley. Paul, welcome. What's your initial thoughts and your views towards this developing story?
Well, I've been missing the conversation, so you'll have to bring me up to speed on this.
We've seen there's been a Syrian missile that has hit a site very close to the Dimona nuclear facility, and that's one of the most sensitive, what our former speaker was saying, Michael Springman, that is essentially one of the biggest, if not the biggest, the most sensitive site in Israel, targeted by a Syrian missile. And this comes, of course, following, you can say, years of Syrian airstrikes against Syria, pardon me, Israeli airstrikes against Syria.
Yes, well, they've had the capability for a long time, and what they're doing is that they're showing that their patience is running out. The Israelis have hit Syria perhaps 100 times, 200 times on a weekly basis or more often in the past year, 2 years, whatever. And Syria has not responded. And the response of the Syrian government has been to say that they have more important issues to deal with. Until now, they're saying that they've had enough, and that it's time to show that that their sovereignty must be respected, and that the violation of their airspace and their territory has to come to an end. It's a time for an end to outlaw regimes that think that they have impunity with their actions.
Right, and to be fair, Damascus has taken the diplomatic route for quite a long time now. It's been sending messages to the United Nations Secretary General, to the UN Security Council, whoever is whoever happens to be the presiding over that council at that particular time. It's taken the diplomatic route. That hasn't worked.
That's correct, and we know the situation of Syria. Their economy is in terrible condition due to the sanctions, and they're dealing with the pandemic without the resources that should be available. They're in a terrible situation. But the point is, you come to a point where you have nothing to lose anymore, and if you put someone in that position, then they become very dangerous, and Syria doesn't want necessarily to use these resources, but it's being pushed into a corner.
Right. On the other hand, Mike, Paul, we've also seen Israeli attacks or terror attacks against Iranian on Iranian soil. You've got the Iranian nuclear scientist who was assassinated, and then you had the act of sabotage by Israel at the Natanz nuclear facility at a time when Iran was trying to negotiate in the Vienna talks regarding the nuclear deal. So do you see any link between because Israel has also been in a state of fear, you can say, for the past 3 and 4 weeks by boosting its so-called defense capabilities around the Dimona nuclear site? Do you see any link between the incidents the terror attacks that Israel conducted against Iran and the incident that we are seeing today?
Well, it's certainly. Iran has, in most cases where it has been attacked, responds directly to the attacker. So that, for example, when the United States assassinated General Qasem Soleimani, Iran hit Ain al-Assad base in Iran, what the Americans are using as a base in Iraq, and it could be linked. So the Iranians have allies in Syria and with Hezbollah and in Iraq as well, and it's not unheard of to do this through allies as well.
I mean, we are seeing from American media and Israeli media, I don't know what sources they're quoting, but they are suggesting that Iran has potentially a hand, of course, in this, has a role in this incident. But at the same time, we have to, of course, hear what the Iranian authorities, we have yet to hear from them It's 5:50 a.m. Tehran time, local time. So we haven't heard anything from Iranian officials to involvement or any role, but we're hearing sources from Israeli media and American media that Iran was involved in this.
As I say, that's very possible. But let's face it, Iran is not the only victim of Israeli aggression. It's Syria and Lebanon and Iraq have all been hit by Israeli actions. So any of these could retaliate with good reason and with the protection law. They have a right under international law to defend themselves, and we should not be surprised when they do. We should be surprised that some actors that have been attacked by Israel have been so patient before retaliating.
And Paul, just finally, now that we're seeing a site so close to the Dimona, Israel's most sensitive site, has been struck, has been hit by a missile. Just one final question: you've got this axis of Israel on one hand, as I also noted with our previous speaker, the former US diplomat, that you have this axis on one hand of Israel, the United States, and now Saudi Arabia joining in, as well as the United Arab Emirates and all those who signed the normalization deals with Israel. And on the other hand, you have Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, you can say also, that are resisting dictatorships, tyranny, you can say, in the region. That's what, that's facts on the ground, people that are waging war, and there are people that are resisting. So is this a game changer?
Well, I think the game is changing. I don't know whether this action is a game changer. Hezbollah has already said, for example, that they could reach any part of Israel with their rockets and their weaponry. And this is an illustration. It's not from Hezbollah, but Hezbollah possesses many of the same weapons. And in fact, the game changer that's happening is that the victims of Western imperialism, and especially that of the United States, because frankly, the United States is behind, has recruited the other Western participants in. So this is an opposition is forming in a very formal sense, and it's growing in size. It includes, of course, all the countries that are under sanctions, not only Iran and Syria and Lebanon, but also Venezuela, for example. Venezuela participates in this. And you have Russia and China that are breaking the sanctions, and they are defending themselves as well. So I think that the game is changing. Whether this is the game changer, I can't say, but it is one of the events and one of the strategies that is helping to change the game. But the game is definitely changing.
Paul, thank you very much indeed for your time there and your contribution. Paul Larudi from the Free Palestine Movement joining us out of Berkeley. And just to continue on this breaking news and developing news item, let me bring in Angelo John Gage, an activist and political commentator out of New Jersey. Mr. Angelo, welcome. Firstly, give me your initial remarks, your initial reaction to this story.
Well, I'm not surprised that the region is getting worse. I mean, frankly, their aggressive behavior, knowing that the United States is behind them, they pretty much do whatever they feel like doing without any repercussions. And I'm not sure who launched this attack. Perhaps Iran finally wanting to get the vengeance for Soleimani and all the other assassinations that the Israelis have partaken in without any consequences. Maybe the Syrians. I don't know much about this particular event, but there's a lot of players in the Middle East that have, some bad blood with the Israelis. And of course, this is, in my opinion, because of the Israeli aggression and all the things they're doing in the region, because my country is backing them again, just to do whatever they want to do without any punishment or total impunity to any consequences whatsoever. So,
right. So
yeah,
you raised a valid, important point there, Angela, that the fact that the United States is, pumping so much military hardware into this region, to Israel to the tune of, I think, around $4 billion from U.S. taxpayer, your taxpayers' money, to Israel, and to Saudi Arabia, and to the United Arab Emirates, and just recently to Egypt, and so on and so forth. So the United States is the one that is militarizing this region, a source of instability in this region. How important is it for the United States to withdraw from this region, and it's not its region?
Well, I mean, I would love if the United States. I'm sorry. Do you hear me?
I do hear you. Yeah.
No, it would be wonderful if the United States would pull out of the region, but we know that AIPAC and all the other lobbies pretty much run our foreign policy. I mean, there's a lot of Zionists in Biden's cabinet. There was a lot of Zionists in Trump's cabinet as well, surrounded by Kushner, making these so-called peace deals with the Palestinians, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, all these things that he did, assassinating Soleimani, which was a favor for Bibi and the Zionist regime. My country has been entangled with the Israelis for a while now, and we have paid a price for it. Intelligence community has been compromised. Jonathan Pollard spying on our country, and we are subsidizing the genocide of the Palestinians. There's some Americans are aware, most are not, because again, the Israelis and the lobbyists here control our media. Most of you know that. Americans are oblivious to it. And so I would love, as an American citizen and a former Marine, that my fellow Marine sailors, airmen, soldiers are not in the region doing the Israelis' dirty work, because that's what the Iraq War was about. That's what many of the things we engaged in was about. And it just cost us blood and money. And again, all the people in the Middle East are suffering as well because of our support for the Israeli regime.
That's an interesting point indeed, Angela, of course. And Iranian officials say the response for Soleimani is, from what I've heard from Iranian officials, that it's much wider than this. But for the assassination of General Soleimani, but there was an attack on Iran's nuclear, as an act of sabotage, a terrorist attack on Iran's Natanz nuclear facility, which all the intelligence, international intelligence agencies, spy agencies in the world have said Iran's nuclear program is peaceful. Yet there was an attack on it amid talks on the Iran nuclear deal in Vienna, and Iran vowed revenge on that. And we're seeing now this attack on close to the Dimona nuclear site, which, by the way, Israel, has nuclear weapons. Do you see any link?
Absolutely. I mean, I would think the Iranians finally had enough of the Israeli aggression with the assassination of the scientists and so on and so forth, because Iran, and from all the research I've done, they are trying to get nuclear energy for their people, not weapons, but energy. And it's the Israelis who have not signed a non-proliferation act, a non-nuclear proliferation act. It's they who did not allow anyone to inspect their Dimona nuclear facility, which the whole planet knows has nuclear weapons, and we don't know how many either. So they're a little hypocritical trying to stop Iran's supposed weapons program when the Israelis have an untold number of nukes, and they don't want Iran to have nuclear power, not even for their citizens. So it's a little hypocritical, of course. But yeah, I think this was Iran retaliating. That was my assumption, but who knows? I mean, what's going on in the area there? The Israelis have many enemies, so we don't know, but I'm assuming it's Iran.
Okay, Angela, thank you very much indeed for that. They certainly do. Angela John Gage, an activist and political commentator, joining us out of New Jersey.